Welcome back, folks, to Liberty and Cocktails with Carl Higbie. Today we're going to talk about the decay of journalism, journalistic integrity, and whether or not it's being perpetuated fairly on either side. We all know the answer to that question, but my next guest is going to weigh in a little bit more to that. What it's doing to our society. Now, this is something that's very important, something that's bothered me over a long time, since my resignation from the Trump administration, because is the media taking it too far? Are they taking out a vendetta on people just to get to the president? It's affecting the way we govern. It's affecting the way our society is held together between friends and family alike. We're also going to talk about mob rule. Is this new shouting down and the ostracization of people for simply saying or thinking or believing one thing, and because you disagree with it, it gives you the right to mob rule, shout them down, hold them down, call their employer, call their advertisers, and essentially attempt to destroy their life. So somebody I look up to and somebody that I hold in very high regard and have always well respected, not only through his political career that I followed in the last 10 years, but also his media career. And that's Governor Mike Huckabee. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure, Carl. Always great to visit with you. And, it's been a long time since we've sat down and had a chat, so looking forward to today.
I know it's always great. I love your insight on Fox. So, I actually, when I texted you yesterday about coming on, within seconds you popped up on the screen. I was like, oh, man, what are the odds?
Well, I like you. You're one of my pals, and it's a delight to be with you.
Well, thank you. I'm careful with that, though, because some people on the left side would deem that associating with me could be bad for your reputation.
Well, that goes both ways, Carl, because having me on is probably not going to make you exactly the beloved figure among some of the people in the media. But then again, you weren't anyway.
No, I definitely was not. But so, with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about today the decay of journalism and how that's affecting society. And you have people like the fake news networks out there that'll stand up and badger the president and grandstand in the White House, in the president's own home, and try to just run a narrative that simply just isn't true most of the time. What's that doing to the fabric of society?
Journalism is an important part of our freedom. Without a responsible and a free press, we really can't have good government. But by the same token, we can't have good government if the press becomes an advocate rather than an observer and a reporter. The purpose of the media is not to tell the audience what they should think. It's to give them the raw facts and allow them to draw their own conclusion. And what we have now is really we've lost journalism. It's a lost art and practiced by only a handful of people. What we mostly have is advocacy, people who have a strong point of view. They're editorialists, they're commentators. There's no pretense of true journalism. And as a result, what the president calls fake news is quite right. When you have people who, it's not that they simply are asking hard questions. They have a responsibility to do that. But if they don't get the answer that they want or like, then they accuse the president or his spokesperson, who in this case I happen to know fairly well.
So you guys are related.
Just a little bit, although
Yeah.
I think she tries to keep that under wraps as much as possible. But let me give you the criteria of when you know you're dealing with a true journalist. If you read a story or listen to a broadcast of a story, and having finished it, you have no idea how that reporter feels, positively or negatively, that's a great journalist. If you read or hear a story and you say, boy, I don't think they like, whether it's President Trump or President Obama, whoever it is, that's not journalism. That's commentary. Mm-hmm. I often say there was a guy that covered me for, almost 20-something years in Arkansas. And to this day, as many stories, hundreds that he wrote about me, I could not tell you whether he liked me or not. I simply don't know. And my assessment is he's a great journalist. He sometimes wrote things I didn't like. He wrote things that, didn't necessarily paint me in a favorable light, but I've observed them. I had either said or done something that, quite frankly, was, an accurate reporting when he put it in the paper. I couldn't argue that. And that's good journalism. You just don't see that very much anymore.
And it's also a mark of huge integrity on your part, because there's a lot of people like, look, I've done things that I've regretted that I wish I hadn't said or done and things like that, and I can own them. But when someone like you can stand up and say, look, this guy reported fairly. I didn't like it. That is the type of integrity we need on both sides of the aisle, both sides of both government and journalism. You know, I was talking to Judge Jeanine Pirro about her new book, Liars, Leakers, and Liberals. She was talking about the exact same thing, about how it is played a part in literally crafting the narrative. I have on my Twitter account, I will post something pro President Trump, and the attacks that come out are just flat out lies that have been perpetuated by the media. Like, for instance, Russia collusion.
Well, I see that every day. I have a little over 1 million Twitter followers, and I tell people that I mostly do Twitter for my own amusement because it gives me an opportunity to kind of just bedevil some of the people on the far left who, for reasons I don't understand, follow me religiously. And the thing that I find so amusing is that their response is rarely a pushback against something I have said in terms of a substantive counterpoint. It's mostly just calling me an imbecile, calling me an idiot, telling, personal attacks. But what I find amusing is the ones that say, what kind of idiot follows you anyway? And one time I couldn't resist, and I just retorted back, well, you're the kind of idiot who follows me, obviously. I mean, what is it about people that they waste their time trolling people that they can't stand? And I know they must think that I'm sitting around just curled up in a fetal position because of what they say, but I honestly could care less. I've been in politics too long. It just doesn't bother me. I do it because I'm now occupying their time and keeping them from hurting someone's feelings who might actually care.
Right. And what I actually started doing, I don't have nearly the followers you do, but I started taking those snippets where, people are visceral, like F-bombs and personal insults and like threats against my children, which as a former SEAL, I don't take so lightly. And I will retweet them with my own comments saying more from the party of tolerance, or just wanted to point out how people who are so enraged by the president's alleged rhetoric that they will go to whatever length to threaten children or things like that. I have no patience for that. And actually, oftentimes, because these people are now the subject of my tens of thousands of followers' attacks, they'll delete their account because this is the first time they've experienced that type of onslaught.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I do think a lot of these people are total cowards. They hide behind some phony name. If they had to publish their real name and their address and where they worked, and if people could make comments to them in a way that they would actually know who they were, these are people who would never have the guts to put their names and their faces out front in the public. These are the kind of people who wear masks when they go to be a part of an Antifa demonstration. They hide behind these pseudonyms because they just don't have the courage to really participate in the public square. And I think that in a way that's what makes them so insidiously dangerous, because they're anarchists. These are not people who are constructively trying to make the country better. Look, I respect liberals who truly believe what they say, and they stand up and say it with a straight face. I may think they're nuts, but at least they have the courage to run for office, get elected, and try to put their stuff into legislation. I just don't have much respect for people who cower behind this. It's like a kid who's hiding behind his mother's apron and refuses to come out when he has to answer for what he did.
And they're hoping for mob rule. I've been speaking with a university in the Socialist Republic of California about potentially coming out and speaking there. And one of the questions they asked me was like, well, what are you going to do for security? I said, well, I can call up 20 other SEALs and we can go, we can hold the line there if you want that. And they said, well, that might escalate things. It's like, no, we're not escalating. We're enduring free speech. We're the free exchange of ideas. I realize that I may not be right about everything. If you ask my wife, I think I'm right about everything, but I have the humility to say, like, let's have an honest, fair debate. And that's the point of this podcast, Liberty and Cocktails, is because I want to talk about liberty. I want to talk about the things that are so important to America, but I want to do it civilly enough to have cocktails afterwards so we don't kill each other at the dinner table.
I respect that a lot because I've enjoyed having what I call really thoughtful discussions with people who are my polar opposites. That gives me traction. If somebody visits with me and everything I say, they say, that's brilliant, that's right, you're great, terrific, I don't get a lot of traction from that. But if somebody says, I hear what you're saying, but here's where I think you're wrong, and then they give me a thoughtful perspective, I gain from that. I learn from it. I enjoy it. And I have throughout my lifetime enjoyed going to college campuses and speaking and letting students stand up and challenge me with whatever view they have. I've been to virtually every Ivy League campus and had those forums with the students, and I love the engagement. What I can't stand is a person who basically says, you disagree with me, therefore I want to shut you down so nobody else can hear you either, because if we don't hear your voice, then we don't have to believe that there's a point of view other than our own. That's dangerous. That is a threat to freedom. It's a threat to liberty. It's a threat, really, to our very form of government.
So it becomes a dictatorship. And now, speaking of a dictatorship, I want to kind of move to this, what the left has deemed now a constitutional crisis if Judge Kavanaugh is confirmed. Now, I would look at his record and say, well, he's ruled in favor of the Constitution. How in the wildest world do they deem this a constitutional crisis?
Well, they deem it because they believe the Constitution is a living document that ought to be politics first, text of the Constitution second. The problem for them with Judge Kavanaugh, is that he believes that the Constitution means what it says what it means, and that the decisions of law should be based on the actual text and the intent of those who wrote the words. My view, and I've said this many times on television, Carl, when I hear people say, we'd like to have a conservative appointment to the Supreme Court, I say, I don't want a conservative. I don't want a liberal. I don't want an ideologue, period. I want a constitutional purist. I want someone who may have political views, but who sets them aside and looks at every case in the context of its constitutional being. And if it's, they may have to rule in a way that is even in conflict with their own views. But what they're doing, they're judging by the standard of the Constitution, not by the standard of their own personal feelings and passions. So this idea of a conservative justice, I find that repulsive, because I don't want a liberal justice. So I don't want an ideological justice. I just want a constitutional.
But that's what the liberals have done so well, is they've deemed anybody who's pro-Constitution in its origination to be a conservative, and anybody who wants, quote, progress is a liberal. And what they've done so well is wage this PR war because they've found a way to make everybody who doesn't fit nook and cranny with the Republican Party on every single issue feel comfortable in the Democratic Party with the liberals and the progressives and things like that. And that's why Donald Trump was so successful, I believe, because he said, you know what, you don't have to agree with everything of the Republican platform. I'm here to represent you. This, to me, is something that Republicans need to fight back on. How can we push back on the liberal party and start winning back the PR battle?
Well, one thing I think we have to do is to start speaking in passionate but compassionate terms. And just as when we were talking about the Constitution and the role of the courts, part of our problem is that we have a lot of people who never passed ninth grade civics. Let me give an example. When I hear people say, well, I want the Supreme Court to either ratify Roe v. Wade or I want them to rescind it, I'm wanting to say to them, the problem with Roe v. Wade was not its position on abortion. The problem was that it legislated and it didn't adjudicate. The problem with the Obergefell decision was not that it really took a position on same-sex marriage. The problem was that it legislated something that it had no authority to do. Mm-hmm. If the justices of the Supreme Court want to create law, then they should all get rid of their robes, resign their post, run for Congress, and then they can go and be a part of a legislative body. Mm-hmm. The purpose of the judicial body is not to say this is what the law ought to be. That is not their role. Their role is to say this is what the law is, and we apply it. If there's nothing in the law that speaks to the issue of abortion or same-sex marriage or prayer in schools, then the Supreme Court has to say we can't speak to that because there's nothing that is given to us in the Constitution that gives us the power to do it. But we say to the legislature, if you wish to create a law that either defends or denies prayer in school, same-sex marriage, that's the role of the legislature. When you pass it and an executive signs it, then we will rightly interpret it.
Right. Well, I mean, you see that with, the travel ban. U.S. Code, I believe it's, Section 8, 1182 or something like that, gives the president the authority to limit immigration from wherever he deems necessary for whatever reason, in most circumstances. And yet the Supreme Court, what was it, 5-4 upheld that, when I thought it should have been a 9-0?
Should have been a 9-0. One of the people I've come to respect, and I respected him for a long time and admired him, but I even more now, is Alan Dershowitz, the very liberal Harvard law professor.
He's getting crucified right now for and he's not a Trump supporter.
No, he's not at all. But he looks at things as objectively as a lawyer should look at them. And what I admire about him, he has taken so much heat from his liberal friends who have not only academically isolated him, they have socially isolated him. He used to spend every summer up on Martha's Vineyard, and now he can't go there anymore because people refuse to even have, as you would say, a cocktail with him. They refuse to acknowledge him in a store or in a restaurant, and they scream at him openly. And to me, this is tragic, but he's made it very clear that, of course, the president has the authority. The court should rule, and he made the point. It should have been 9-0. Any other decision would have been a political one, not a judicial one.
Mm-hmm. And again, Liberal Party has done this so well, where they play to emotion rather than factual basis or any logical rationale that historically or present. And we as a society need to, or as a Republican Party, need to kind of find a way to level the playing field here, and says you can't make these emotional decisions. I mean, we have this Cortez woman who unseated in a long-term incumbent Democrat, and running in New York as just an open socialist. I mean, 50 years ago, she would have been thrown in jail for her point of view. Now she's the Democratic poster child.
It is a little bit unnerving to see that the Democrats continually to move further to the left. And when Dianne Feinstein is considered too conservative for San Francisco, for California, and she's now panned by her own party because they just don't think she's harsh enough, left enough. When the heroes are people like Bernie Sanders, who honeymooned in the USSR when he got married, for heaven's sakes. I mean, this really ought to be a wake-up call, and I think it is. You're seeing now a lot of people who've been lifelong Democrats who are joining what's being termed as the walk-away movement because they have just been left behind, not by a party that once represented working-class people and pretended that that's what they were all about, but now it's just an openly avowed socialist agenda to destroy capitalism, to redistribute somebody else's earnings, and to call that good government.
Yeah, I mean, there's zero time. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's zero times in history socialism has actually ended up being prosperous for the subjects of it.
Can't think of a single time it's ever worked. I mean, if people want to know what socialism really does for folks, take a one-way trip to Venezuela. Mm-hmm. Take all your belongings there. They won't last long because somebody will take them since they don't have anything, including toilet paper. But just tell us how well that's working out for you after you've been there a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking to me. And in the liberal, devil's advocate side of this is, we'll look at, some of the Northern European countries that are run on socialist principles with the universal health care and things like that. But the fact is those socialized policies are new, and they gained the majority of their wealth, and they had their boom prior to those policies being implemented, and it has actually slowed growth once they were implemented. Why is it that the world, the entire, whatever the governments of the world are running away from, America, or at least the progressive left, is running headfirst into?
A lot of it is because the left essentially bases all of their viewpoints on what I think, what I believe, what I feel. Rather than on what I would call objective facts and objective truth. Even when I hear people, Oprah comes to mind, who talks about, well, let me speak about my truth. There's no such thing as my truth, as if it's individualized. We're not talking here about walking through a buffet and picking out the items to make your salad, and your truth is whatever you choose for it to be. Truth is objectively truth. I mean,
you can choose your gender, Governor.
What's that?
You can choose your gender, so why can't you choose your truth?
Yeah. But even that becomes laughable. I mean, right now, you and I even making that comment would get us in all kinds of trouble because we're politically incorrect. But the thought that a 7-year-old kid could just up and say, I know that when I look in the mirror, I have the body of a boy, but I've just decided I'm a girl. No, I can't make that decision. That's like making the decision that I have wings and I can fly and I'm going to get up on top of a 50-story building and go soaring because I feel like Superman, and therefore I identify as him. Well, that doesn't
Gravity
make
doesn't
me
care.
Yeah, gravity is a cruel master. It truly is.
Exactly. Gravity is the proverbial reality in that situation. Before I let you go, because I know you're a busy guy, you saw the Peter Strzok hearings. What?
Yes.
I mean, bureaucrat, arrogant, typical deep state. Real quick, your thoughts on what the hell he was thinking.
Carl, never in my life have I seen someone who exhibited such a smug, condescending, arrogant, and really disgusting attitude toward his bosses. I mean, I've always believed that if you're a public servant, whether you're employed, appointed, or elected, you work for the people of your county, your state, your nation. And here's a person whose salary is paid for by the people he thought he could smell when he went into a Walmart. This is a person who believed so arrogantly that his view was above all the views around him, that he could act with impunity toward anything he wanted to do. And the smirk on his face, it was disgusting. And I thought, if he'd have just walked in there with a little humility and said, folks, I said some things that were really not only impolite, but they were improper and just wrong. And I have to say, in looking at these in retrospect, I am deeply ashamed. If he'd have taken that approach, he could have done himself and the FBI a lot of good.
Right.
But I think he single-handedly did more to harm the institution than any corrupt cop has ever done in hurting a really fine institution of law enforcement professionals, the majority of which are solid people.
Yeah, and I mean, it is disgusting. And the thing is like, I mean, you're familiar with my resignation. In 2012, I said some pretty offensive things. Some were out of line. Some, were, insensitive. Some I still stand by in a much more formal manner as far as a principle. But, I stepped away from the administration because I knew that as a taxpayer-funded paycheck was not the right place for me to go. It was... I felt that I was doing the administration more harm by staying, so I stepped away, and I don't see that same humility from Peter Strzok and his ilk, to be honest, and it really bothers me.
Well, it should bother all of us, and I think people shouldn't be held to a point of never being able to be employed because they said something or even they did something that happened 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. But the point is, if we own up to it and say, look, there were some things that I did and said, maybe it was when the person was in college, maybe it was even when they were 30 years old and now they're 50 years old. There are a lot of things that change in our lives and maybe our perspective. What worries me is that if you're a conservative, you're held accountable for things you did when you were 7 years old. If you're a liberal, there is no accountability whatsoever. You're free to say and to do anything, including destroy someone else's life, reputation, and livelihood.
With no recourse. I mean, the attacks on the families. My daughter got a death threat from that on social media. I had to get the police involved. I mean, that is the visceral reaction that we're seeing from the political opponents, and it makes me sad. Having fought for what I fought for overseas, it really makes me sad that people want to go to that length. But
it's despicable. There's no doubt, and I'm sorry for your family, and mine has been through the same thing. And it's just one of those things you just scratch your head and say, look, it's one thing to come after me. I asked for this stuff. My kids didn't. Leave them alone. Exactly.
Well, Governor, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate your insight as always. You're a great sport. You're a great Republican, great American.
Carl, great to talk to you, my friend. Take care.
Thank you, Governor. Now, Governor Mike Huckabee is just a stand-up guy all around. I was on the MAGA train since day one. And even when he was on stage with my man, debating him, as an opponent, I had the utmost respect for Mr. Huckabee because he is just so well-spoken, so charismatic, so, just polite and a good sport about everything. That it is somebody that I really look up to so much, and to have him on this program for one of my earliest podcasts, I'm really honored. Look, folks, there's going to be a lot more of these coming out, and I want to hear from you. So follow me on Twitter at Carl Higbie, because I want to hear what you have to say. If you want to join the program, I'm happy to have you on, especially if you're a liberal and you want to debate. If you want to have an actual debate, if you're here to just shout me down and call me names and things like that because you don't agree with me, I'm not interested. And if you want to have an honest debate about the issues, not the emotions behind them, about the actual issues themselves, I want to hear from you. So follow me at Carl Higbie. And I'll get out there, and I do actually try to monitor every single thing on my Twitter when it's not too busy. So I will try to get to you. So please do. And, come on, be part of the conversation. You never know. Believe it or not, I do have some liberal friends that those are some of the best conversations I've ever had. So, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Remember, at Carl Higbie, this is Liberty and Friday.